Welcome to Mommy Heal Thyself. We feature guests who provide you with the tools, resources, and strategies you need to say no to a life of pain and suffering from all forms of preventable disease, toxic drugs, and unnecessary surgeries. We hope to inspire you to boldly reclaim your ability to heal and to serve the ones you love.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. Today, I have the wonderful pleasure of bringing to you Devora Segall. She's a licensed clinical social worker and parenting coach who works with mothers who love their children deeply, but struggle with yelling, overwhelm, and emotional exhaustion. She helps mothers to build calmer, more intentional responses by understanding what's happening in their bodies, their emotions, and especially when parenting while dealing with ongoing health challenges. Wow. I am so thrilled to have you here with us because, as you can see from our title, we are very much focused on helping our mommies to heal themselves. And part of us healing ourselves is, of course, healing the relationships that we have with our children. And as you know, we can't put any aspect of our lives on the shelf. So as we're dealing with our relationships with our children, we're also dealing a lot of times with certain chronic health issues. So thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate your mission so much. This idea of, healing from within. It's really, really powerful.
So tell me a little bit more of your journey. How did you get to this point of helping women in this particular situation and writing a phenomenal book in the process?
So it started about 30 years ago. My oldest was 4 years old, and I just felt very, very stuck. I was trying to get out to my job, and my child just wouldn't listen, and I was feeling so overwhelmed. I was ready to cry. I was ready to, I tried everything. I tried the bribing. I tried the threatening. Nothing was working. He just who's basically refusing to get dressed. I was in a rush to get somewhere, and this wasn't the first time this had happened. And I'm like, I need tools, right? How do I, continue to be kind to my child while still getting them to do what they needed to do? I guess I didn't have such a great model. Although my natural instinct was to hit and to force, and I didn't want to do that. So I just needed to figure out, what can I do? So that's when I started on this journey to learn skills and tools. I took some parenting classes. I read some books. And then about 10 years, more like 12 years ago at this point, I went back to school to become a therapist, to become a social worker. And that's when I discovered this type of, you call it healing, a therapeutic modality called DBT. Now, DBT just included all the good things about therapy and all these tools that I felt are so, so powerful for me as a parent, and really in any relationship, but specifically as a parent. So in other words, I actually have 10 children of my own. So
Wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I have a lot of personal practice, and then working with clients the last 9 years, I just found that they also needed this. They needed these tools and these skills. So that's why I developed a unique way to use these DBT skills, using them specifically to help parents.
Now,
And,
back up a little bit for us that are not as well versed as you. What is DVT or DBT?
DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy. It was put together. It's really a combination of a lot of different therapies. I don't know if you've heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So DBT has that in it, but it's also, the issue with CBT is that it's not so validating. It's more like your thoughts are where you are, but it doesn't so much take into account our feelings. So DBT also has an aspect of it that takes into account our feelings. it's really, there's really four modules, four kind of steps or four aspects of DBT. There's emotional regulation. Actually, it starts with mindfulness. I'm sure you've heard of that. And then there's emotion regulation. Then there's distress tolerance and interpersonal effectiveness. Now, I feel like the first step is always mindfulness, but straight from mindfulness, when I work with parents, we jump into emotion regulation. We start with ourselves. We start with noticing how we're feeling. Then that's mindfulness in a nutshell. Then we start with regulating those emotions when they're really big. And then we get to the other skill of interpersonal effectiveness, which is how we deal with the other person, right? It starts with us as mothers. Heal thyself. It's like right up my alley. We heal ourselves first.
I love that you mentioned that. Well, I love that you mentioned that because a lot of times when we talk about parenting and we talk about the difficulties that we have with our children, many times we are tempted to view it as a them problem. And we don't first take a moment to, as you said, become aware of what's going on inside of here. So I love that that is one of the first and primary things that you do in this particular modality.
Again, we don't ignore the day-to-day of dealing with the children because the children aren't going away. We can't go off into some castle somewhere and work on heal ourselves first. We're healing ourselves in those moment-to-moment interactions with our children.
So give me an example of some of the types of people that come to you. What are they dealing with and how do you help them?
So, I like to think of myself, as a parent first. I like to think of myself as a parent, just, though that 2-year-old or 4-year-old that's starting to have a mind of their own. And I don't know what to do. And I either yell or I get like a little maybe nasty or I shut down, right? And I want to interact. I want to keep that connection, but I don't have the tools, right? So those are the type of people that will come to me. The people that they love their children so much, but yet in those day-to-day interactions, they're not able to act in ways that they really want to. And they don't have a good models, or they don't have good, mentors. I'm their mentor, I'm their model, and I teach them skills. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more of a particular skill or tool that you have found has been very effective for a lot of the people that you're working with.
So, in order to understand the second skill, I really need to give you the first skill. I would say the powerful thing is the emotion regulation. But in order to get to emotion regulation, you have to first get to mindfulness. Now, I like to explain mindfulness. I learned this from a teacher. Her name is Jean Eich.
Okay.
She explained it so clearly. Mindfulness is 3 steps: observe, describe, participate. Observe, you're noticing what's going on in your body. You're noticing your thoughts, your judgments. You're noticing what's going on in the outside also. You're just taking that moment to notice. That's observe. Then there's describe. You're describing it to yourself. You're putting language on it. Because when we just have this amorphous feeling, we're not, it's a lot harder to control. It's a lot harder to do with the next step, which is what I'm about to share with you. And then the next step is participate. How am I going to participate? What am I going to do? What am I going to not do? Right? Because participate sometimes mean don't do anything, right? I'm not ready to act on this. The next step, so then once we know where we're holding, once we know where we are emotionally, then we could do the next step, which is, I find the most powerful, which is emotion regulation. We talk about improve the moment. right? Improve stands for many different things that we can do to make ourselves feel better in the moment so that we'll have the emotional energy to deal with the child. So
Mm.
you want, that's the, so improve. I stands for imagery. We use imagery, use visuals to calm ourselves down, take ourselves to our, favorite place, our calm place. That's one example. Again, this idea that there are things we can do to calm ourselves down. The next one, M, stands for meaning. I could go through the whole thing, but I don't think you want me talking for the next hour. But
Well,
meaning, like, why are we doing what we're doing? That sometimes
yeah,
helps us get through the parts. These are just examples of things we could do to regulate, to lower the intensity of our emotions in that moment, in those moments.
what have you found is one of the more significant mistakes or misunderstandings that parents have with regards to parenting and the relationship with their children?
That is such a good question. Um, so it's the mistake that I tried to make, that I did as a parent, trying to do it by myself, thinking I'm going to do better than my mother did, right? I'm going to figure this out all on my own. Not getting the help, not reaching out and getting the real help that they need. I would say that's the top mistake, trying to do it all alone. Absolutely. Another mistake is trying to use our guilt as motivation. We need to focus on the positive, what our goals are, right? How we want to show up as a better parent and not to constantly, have that feeling of guilt, because that doesn't end up very well. If we're working on guilt, we're not going to be as successful at using these skills. But just also the third mistake that parents make is thinking that we have to be perfect or we messed up our kids forever. It doesn't work that way. We have to be human. We have to be trying. We have to be modeling for our children a person who wants to grow and improve. And that's all. That's the best. That really is the best we can do, because we're human, having human children, right?
Absolutely. I love that you bring up those three areas in terms of number one, parenting can be such a lonely adventure. And unfortunately, we make it a lonely adventure because there is that sense of guilt or shame that we're supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to figure it all out. And now, especially in this culture, I find where you have children blaming everything in their lives on something that their parent did or didn't do. And so that puts even more pressure on us mere mortals to, because one gives you a manual. And even if they did, just like every other book that we got in school, and we get into reality and was like, throw that book out. That's not going to really help in this situation. So I love that you have those three reality checks for our parents. And I'm curious as to when you say peaceful parenting, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we get to that wonderful zone of having that peaceful relationship with our children?
So that takes time and effort and energy, but that's ultimately the goal of being to parent without as much friction. In other words, we know what to say, we know what to do, whatever our kids throw at us, so that we're not constantly butting heads with them. So we're not constantly fighting ourselves. We're working with ourselves to just be a better version of ourselves, and we're working with our children to help them be better versions of themselves. It's peaceful because we're all working towards the same goal of becoming better.
So what do you find causes a lot of the friction in our families?
A really good question. Well, starting with the internal friction, it's the confusion of not knowing what to do. We're one way one time, we're a different way another time. And then the children pick up on that of, so they'll keep testing. They'll keep pushing the buttons. So that often is what causes a lot of the friction. Um, Also a lot of, a lack of awareness of emotional bank account. This idea
Mm,
that we have to constantly be making those positive deposits in order for our child to be ready at times when we have to set a rule, make a boundary, say no, right? In other words, sometimes parents are so busy, even though they love their children, they have a hard time showing it or taking the time to show it in a way that the child could feel. So
yeah.
again, it all starts, with really what I call attachment, right?
Mhm.
My whole parenting approach is very much attachment based. We
Hmm.
start with just those early years of being totally there for our children. And then as they get older, we're there for them with more rules, but we don't forget about keeping on making those deposits, just loving them unconditionally, loving them because they were
Yeah.
born.
Wow. That's so important, that concept of um, being able to maintain the guardrails. And I think another area that causes a lot of friction is that fear that you're going to mess up, that fear that you're going to screw your child up, that fear that you're going to do something wrong. And it just becomes paralyzing sometimes. And that fear can also lead to an over emphasis on control and restriction. So it's like that thin line between having that nurturing guardrail that helps protect
Hmm.
versus the fearful restriction that can take your breath away, and erode the attachment that you're working so diligently at creating.
Right. I'm so glad you brought that up because the D in DBT stands for a dialectic. The idea of
Hmm.
a dialectic is that two opposite ideas could be true at the same time, right? So you
Hmm.
brought up an idea that it's true. Fear can have a negative effect, but fear could also have a positive effect.
Hmm.
We're afraid to mess up our children. So we're going to get all the information and all the training and all the mentoring we need in order to do the best job possible. More than that, we can't do, right? In other words, we could feel the fear and we could act anyway, right? Fear is not always a bad thing, but I hear what you're
Hmm.
saying, that some too
Hmm.
much of it can can really undo what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely, absolutely. And at the same time, even when we think about peaceful parenting, many times people confuse peaceful with not having conflict, so as Martin Luther King so famously said many years ago, that peace is not simply the absence of conflict. And I was curious, is that also true in the methodology that you're teaching in terms of approaching peaceful parenting?
So as you said so eloquently, as you quoted Dr. Martin Luther King, peace doesn't mean the absence of conflict. Peace means that we have tools to manage conflict.
Mm.
That's what the interpersonal effectiveness part is about. It's about being assertive, about setting
Mhm.
boundaries, but with
Mhm.
kindness, right?
Mhm.
Again, this is a dialectic. This is a dialectic of children need boundaries, children need love, but it doesn't contradict, right? We can do both in the right way,
Absolutely.
at the right time, in the right atmosphere.
Now, given the fact that you have 10 people that we call children, I would love for you to share with us one funny story of your child teaching you something that somehow has become an integral part of what you do today with helping other parents to be more successful.
I could give you a recent story.
Okay.
Just being imperfect, right?
Yeah.
So I was driving in my car, and I guess my 9-year-old and my 13-year-old were fighting. My youngest is 9, my oldest is
Hmm.
34.
Hmm.
So he doesn't fight anymore. I mean, at least not in my house. Anyway, he's raising a crew of his own, thank God. Um, so no, so I was driving down the road and I had just written this book and published this book.
Mhm.
And I'm driving down the road and my two kids are fighting in the back seat. And my sister, I was on the phone with my sister. I was talking to her about it. I was talking not about that. I was just talking to her about my book and I was so
Mhm.
excited.
Mhm.
And I said, "What do I do? My kids are fighting in the back seat." So she says, I know this really great parenting guru. Maybe you should ask her about, like what to do. Anyway, so that's my story.
And you're sticking to it, huh?
Just, I'm human. I can still act up and I don't always know what to do. But
Isn't that
but
true?
on a more serious note, I knew what not to do, right? Yell
Mm,
at
mm,
them, to hit
mm-hmm.
them. No, you calmly pull over to the side, say, we can't drive when kids are fighting. It disturbs my
Yeah.
driving.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, as much as I felt at a loss, I did know what not to do, as opposed to maybe, trying to remember my daughter. I had a daughter. I remember she was 2.5. She refused to sit in her car seat. She would wiggle herself out of her car. The old-fashioned car seats, the kid could actually wiggle themselves out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know what to do. It's like, what do I do? Sit there and hold her? I'm driving. Anyway, so
It's
yeah,
so funny
so
that
it's
you
been a
bring up that
journey.
story because it
Mhm.
reminds me when I was a school bus driver and when they were acting a fool in the back, I said, you know what? It's okay. And I would just pull over the bus and stay there at the side of the road. And they were like, quiet, 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 sit down. I'm like, mm-hmm. And they knew what they were doing. And as you said, you learn what not to do because I said to them, you look, you are not getting me to looks like some crazy idiot yelling and screaming into this bus. I'm just going to sit here and be quiet until you guys figure out what to do and what not to do. So I
Right,
love your story.
right, exactly.
Oh, heavens. Well, my dear, I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Now, before we go, what is one last thing that either we have not covered or something that you want to stress as critical for our parents to really have a better understanding of how to move forward in a positive manner with regards to their parenting and their relationships with their children?
It's so good that you asked. Um, so I would say, in all my journey and meeting people, I feel like very often we try to live top, shoulder, what's it called? Neck from the neck up. We're not
Mm,
always so aware of what's going on for us physically. And I feel
mm,
like that awareness is very, very powerful when we're trying to change our responses. Sometimes we don't know why we're responding the way we're responding. But if parents just take a moment, obviously safety permitting, you
yeah.
know, we can't forget about safety. I always say we put on our safety hat first, we check that everyone's safe, then we take care of mommy,
Mhm.
and then we deal with whatever the children are throwing at us. So I guess that's the thing. Safety first, mommy next, kids third, right? I mean, other needs first, right? First, we make sure there's no imminent physical danger before doing all this, mindfulness stuff, whatever you
Mhm.
want to call
Mhm.
it. But the
Mhm.
mindfulness stuff is not just stuff. That's what will make all the difference in what's going on in our homes.
That is so key, so beautifully put. And that's one of the things that we stress every time we meet, which is the importance of checking in for mom first, checking in, putting that oxygen mask on ourselves first before we try to
Mhm.
help everybody else. Otherwise, the plane goes down and everybody's dead. So I
Right.
love that you have emphasized the importance of that. And once again, thank you for being part of our session today. And we're going to have a phenomenal free resource guide for you in the show notes. And if you can just tell us a little bit about what that guide is so that our ladies will be excited about getting it.
So it's really a three-step guide based on what I presented today, but just sort of
Mhm.
like a workbook, step by step. How do I, you know, reset or reconnect with my kids and enjoy
Mhm.
being a mother again? It's really just an encapsulated It's like a little cheat sheet about what I teach.
Fantastic. And we'll also put a link to the book that you have just recently published, so that if any of you guys want to do a much deeper dive into this, not only do you have the 3-step guide, but you also have the ability to get her wonderful book, Peaceful Parenting. Well,
Amazing.
my ladies, thank you for being here with us today. And until next time, peace and blessings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. If you like what we're doing here, please share, subscribe, like us, and leave a comment. Your feedback is very much appreciated.